Well, one of the things I have learned over my decades of ministry, of doing this pastoring thing, is that it is not only okay to laugh and to have a good time, that it is quite frankly very much part of the fabric of how God has designed us in his image. I believe wholeheartedly that Jesus was a practical joker. I think he pranked and punked the disciples. I think it happened. Okay? And so I do want us to be able to laugh. I want us to be able to have a good time. I actually want Sunday mornings when we come together, throughout the week when we meet in our life groups and other small group opportunities, I want that to be times that you look forward to most. That it's times where I can't wait to get together. We have a blast. And that should be a culture of who we are. I want that to be the DNA of us as a church, as an expression of God's family on earth. But there are times, even in the midst of all that fun and laughing, and if you know me, I'm a big goof. I love to laugh. There are serious things we have to talk about. There are things that you can't really joke about. And we've been doing this series for a couple weeks now already, about 3 weeks. We're in our 4th week, called We Don't Talk About That. It's a series where we're looking at things that, quite frankly, the church at large either hasn't talked about at all. We just go, oh, yeah, we don't talk about that. Or maybe we talk about it, but not in a real healthy or helpful way. Or sometimes we even just talk about it flat out wrongly. We just throw our opinion out there, let it sit and run away, even if it's not in line with God's word. So we've been taking these weeks, and we have a number of them left, where we talk about tough things. And today is going to be one of those. Today, we are continuing in the We Don't Talk About This message series. And each week I'm asking, but why not? Why don't we talk about it? Or why are we talking about things wrongly? Well, I found in researching this topic, I found some reasoning for why not, why another author. This guy's name is Greg Kulik, I believe is how you say it, or Kukl. He wrote, Why Are Christians Confused? That was the title of his work. And here's some things that he said. He said, many who identify as Christian seem to effortlessly embrace ideas completely at odds with a biblical understanding of reality. I am distressed about it because they have fallen into a trap that Paul warned about. And this is from Colossians 2. He says, see to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception according to the tradition of men, rather than according to Christ. In other words, Greg says here, there's a way the world sees things, and there's a way Jesus sees things. He then goes on to say, on a host of culturally charged moral and spiritual issues, faithfulness is not theologically complicated. I think there are 2 reasons for this. First, and he's talking about the confusion that happens amongst Christians. He says, first, it's clear that many Christians are just untutored in the basics. But there's a second thing going on here. Many Christians sadly seem to care more about what their friends think about them than about what Jesus thinks about them. Now, each of these things is dangerous on its own. In combination, they are spiritually deadly. I think he's onto something. I think he's onto something that there's like this mix of us not being as informed as we could or should on topics that have theological bearing, but we also care more about what that other guy thinks about us. We don't want to say something because, I don't want to come across as holier than thou, right? I don't want to be arrogant in that way, or I don't want to offend them, or I really don't know too much about that. I really shouldn't say anything. And we create these excuses based upon the perceptions of others, and we use that to not speak. And I think sometimes we can't get away from speaking at all, so sometimes we'll just throw something out without really considering it, and then we talked about it, but not about in a way that is healthy or helpful or maybe even accurate. It does take us being thinking individuals to do this life the way God wants us to. And it's because we are created as not just physical beings, but as non-physical, spiritual beings as well. We have minds, we have souls, we have all these components swirling together to make us who we are. And in fact, we're to love God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our mind, with all our strength. That's what the Bible tells us. So that means that this thing up here, that little gelatinous glob behind your eyeballs, that is supposed to be used. We have to engage it. And we have to be willing to speak on things with a heart towards, I need to honor Jesus above all. Now, the interesting thing is if we are truly honoring Jesus, if we are truly holding God in esteem, how we do that will never be dishonoring to others. But sometimes we flipped it in an effort to not dishonor others. When we focus on that, we actually end up dishonoring them and God as well. So when we have a right thinking, when we put those in the right order, we end up accomplishing that thing that gets in the way of us doing it in the first place. It's almost counterintuitive. But why this is important is we're talking about a topic that I really feel woefully unprepared to speak on. See, the topic I'm going to speak on, I can only really talk about in the theoretical. It's not one in the grand scheme that I have had much connection with. I have through others, so vicariously and walking with others, but it's not a topic that I would say, oh, I am a first-hand recipient of true deep knowledge on the subject. We are going to be talking about faith and abuse. This is a topic which in our culture has come up in popularity on speaking about in remarkable ways over the last 10 to 20 years. In ways where before, even in culture, this was barely spoken of. Now in the world, it seems that this is much more coming to bear. And I can say, in some ways, even too much. There's times where, because it is real, we'll then say, well, that must be everything. We put all the eggs in that basket, and it becomes too much, and I become unbalanced in that, where I begin to think everything is abuse, or every issue in my life is directly related to abuse done to me. And that's not healthy for the individual or for society. So what we need to do is look at it. What is the right, faithful way of looking at abuse, of talking about abuse, of understanding what the Bible has to say, and therefore what we should do, understanding what God thinks about it and what our response should be. Because I will say, over the years, the church has actually done a pretty poor job in the area of abuse. Now, if you look over the last 2 millennia of church history, 2,000 years of church history, incredible goods have come from it. Not just spiritual goods when it comes to the spiritual life and the eternity of the soul, absolutely. But with the promulgation of the gospel, as the gospel spread through the world and changed lives came about, great things happened. Great humanitarian goods happened. Yes, there were those within the church who used the faith as a grounds and support for slavery. That has happened. But do you know who were the champions of actually changing slavery were? Christians. They said this practice of enslaving others, those made in the image of God, that is completely incompatible with the teachings of the Bible, with the God of the Bible, with those who would choose to follow after him. It's inconceivable, and we got it wrong. Those who said it was right, they are completely in the wrong, and they led the charge to abolish slavery all around the world. Great good has come, but also we have to honestly look back and say, hey, the church itself has wrought great pain. Okay? The fact was, the church in many ways, in many areas, did initially support slavery. That was abusive. Has anyone heard of the Spanish Inquisition? Anybody? Yep.
Unexpectedly, yeah.
What? Okay, well, we know about it. Let me suggest, though faith-driven, that was not a good thing. People were killed. Thank you, son. Thank you for injecting a little bit of humor into an incredibly serious situation. Okay? Through the Spanish Inquisition, people were murdered in the name of God, simply for power and control. And we can go back through their instances over and over again, and we as a church have to do something that is very, very hard for us. We have to admit wrongdoing and not try to Band-Aid over it and say, well, yeah, some people did some bad things, but look at all the good things. Yes, I admit, incredible good has come, but we have to name the difficulty, we have to name the hurt, we have to name the abuse that has happened in the name of God and not excuse it. Simply name it as wrong and do the work of restoring. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about. We're not going to spend a huge amount of time in Scripture today, which is a little bit of a sidestep from what I normally do, because I think it is so incredibly apparent at even the most surface level that God is not a fan of abuse. If you were confused on that, this sermon, I don't have enough time to change your mind on that, okay? But we're going to make it clear. The Bible does say that, but we're going to talk about the ramifications. What does that mean for us? okay? And if you are in this place of, oh, no, God's down with abuse. He's cool with that. Please, before you leave, sit down. We'll schedule a time to chat because I'm worried about you. Because that kind of a mindset where you can excuse abuse leads to suffering and the dishonoring of God's image in ways that defy imagination. Quite frankly, that's how groups like the KKK can exist. Because they can look at someone made in the image of God and say, God wants me to hurt you. And that is completely incompatible with the Christian faith. So let's hop into it. I want to start with this very bold statement, which I think is just very intuitive. God is absolutely opposed to any abuse of his created order. So yes, it's not just of people, but abusing the creation is wrong. We can't show disregard. And I know this because of how he talks about his creation at the very beginning of the Bible, in the book of Genesis. Last week we looked at the image of God, how God created all of humanity. All. No one is outside of that. All of humanity is made in the image and the likeness of God. That we have the representation of his authority and who he is, his personality and characteristics. All of us bear that. We need one another, and corporately and individually, we display his image, his authority, his likeness to the world. And as a result, we all have dignity and worth. But in that same passage, Genesis 1, last week we read verses 26 and 27. If we look at Genesis 1, and starting in verse 28, we read this, and God blessed them. He had made them, right, in his image. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And we don't have time to completely dig into all of these. Remember, I mentioned about 3 years ago, I think it is now, we did a series called Imago Dei, where we talked about the image of God. Imago Dei is the Latin for image of God. We took 5 weeks and we talked about it, and I dug more into these terms in that series. So if you want some more, you can go back on the website or on YouTube, find those messages and listen there. But these are 3 Hebrew terms: fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Fruitful is para. It's to increase the nature of something, to make more of the essential characteristics of something. Multiply is the reproduction of kind. This is the word raba, and it's to literally increase in number. And this is where we often get the reproductive mandate when it comes to being in God's image. That yes, God's general plan for humanity is for marriage to result in children. That's part of how he designed us, because that reflects God's own creative essence. God is a creative God, and that is how we promulgate and perpetuate that creative aspect of who he is. But we are to make more of what his purposes are. It's often used in conjunction with para, the being fruitful, but then also the fill the earth. This is malay, and it refers to kind of the completion of something or the satiation of something. So if you have a purpose, man, you are making sure it is fulfilled. You are making sure that it comes to its full bearing. And then also we have this word subdue, and this is one that has particularly been abused. This original word in the Hebrew that the Bible was written in is kabash, and it can refer to kind of conquering something, but not generally or always or even most of the time about like squishing down and showing that you're dominant over it. That's not the picture. It's taking something and using it to its full ability. So it's not just, well, I guess it's there, whatever, it can do what it's want. But no, I'm going to use it for all it's worth. I'm going to make good use of this thing, and it will serve the purposes for me that it was designed to serve. So if you had a tractor, you could say, well, I'm going to use that when this is very realistic in Lancaster County. I'm going to ride that tractor from my house to Walmart and back. Right? You could do that. And we see people do that. And I don't know about you, but I'm tempted to pull the Jesus bumper sticker off my car so that nobody knows I'm a Christian with how I want to respond, okay? It's really annoying. But they can do it, right? You can use the tractor for just general transportation, but that's not what a tractor's for. The tractor is designed to work in a field, to plow a field, to harvest the field. It is used for that. So if I'm going to subdue the tractor, if I'm going to kibosh it, I'm not going to be content to let it just kind of drive me to Walmart and back. I'm going to make sure it is used to plow that field. It is going to be used for its express purpose to the fullest. That's what subdue means. Not, well, it's selfishly, it's whatever I want to do with it. It's mine. And then again, that word dominion, and dominion over the fish of the sea, of the birds of the air, over every living thing that moves on the earth. This is rada. This is used about 22 times in the Old Testament of our Bible, and it refers to an ongoing rule over something or someone. It carries the idea of governing, that you are the one who is responsible to make sure that its subjugation in that word, that subduing, the being used to its fullest, happens. You don't say, well, yeah, it was made for that, it can do that if it wants, let it go. It is this word that pulls into the idea of I'm actively involved in making sure it happens. And what is that about? All those things, the fruitful, multiplying, filling, subduing, dominion, what is the purpose? Well, it is being God's image. And what does God, so that we're reflecting God, he says, when God saw everything he had made, now that humanity was here, everything, the totality of creation, he said, behold, it was very good. God looked at the whole of his created order, and he goes, that's good. That's really good. And he places mankind at the center and says, now you replicate it. You use it to its fullest. You make sure that it does exactly what it was designed to do, to bring life, to bring purpose, to spew out love and creativity and all the wonderful things that are at the center of who God is. You see, all of creation is the physical manifestation of God's character. God didn't need it, but he chose to do it so that there could be those who could experience his love and whom he could love and that they could love in return. It was all about this promulgation of love, this replication of love. And like I said, yes, there is a mandate within here of biological reproduction that was woven into the fabric of humanity. That's not to say that if you don't have kids or you can't have kids that you're somehow less than. That's not what it means. It just means, generally speaking, we were created to create. We were created to make more. And we need to take that goodness that God saw and replicate it. And quite frankly, to know that God at his center, at his core, is about love, and therefore he would be completely, absolutely opposed to abuse of any kind. We know that God is love. Do you know how we know that God is love? What was that? He first loved us, yes. But even deeper than that, not just that he did choose to love us, the Bible teaches us something in 1 John 4:8. Any idea what that is? It says that God is love. That love at its purest sense can only truly be love if it's God and if it's from God. Now, we get to replicate that, but at the very center of the essence of God is love, and love is absolutely mutually exclusive from abuse. There are certain things that cannot exist in tandem, right? So if you were to come into this room in the middle of night, it would be very what? Dark, right? Darkness is there, it fills the room. The moment you flip one light on in this room, do you know what happens to the darkness? Disappears. Now you can have differing degrees of how bright it is, but at the presence of even the smallest amount of light, the darkness around it disappears. Light and dark cannot coexist. That's one of the things that in our world you'll see, well, it's a balance. You know, there's light and dark. And I understand some of the sentiment behind it, but at its core, it's false. Darkness cannot exist in the presence of light. Therefore, the light, which is God's love, when that is present, abuse can't be there. So whenever abuse is present, that shows the absence of love. And so that's where I can say that at its core, how God designed the capstone of all his creation was to promulgate what was most important to him was love. That we were to continually create it, reproduce it, and see it to its utmost end. That is what we were designed for. So that means, because that's who God is, that's how he's designed, that's who he is, humanity must oppose and repair any abuse of his created order. That's our call. Now, in so many ways, those of us who are part of the faith, we've learned this. There's and you guys in particular know that I have a really, really favorite word. What's my favorite word, church? Gospel. And why is gospel so important to me? Because it's what? See, I was so excited. You showed you had caffeine, and now you all fell asleep. Do we need to stand and do a few jumping jacks? Because here's the thing, I know you get excited about things, and you don't have to be as crazy as me, but when we talk about the fundamental shift of the entire created order, where all of sin and death and destruction was reversed on this pivotal moment in all of history, and where death reigned, now life exists and is given for free and all eternity, open and accessible to everyone, not by means of their earning it, their merit, but fully on the amazing grace and mercy of God. This all turned on the pivot around this idea of the gospel, which means what, church? Good news! Good news! It is such good news. It changed everything. And for us, if we truly believe that it is good like that, that doesn't mean I live the same on the other side of it. If I truly understand that my sin created separation between me and God and me and others, and that God's love manifested through Christ, mediated through his love to me, that means I will act differently in relation to him and to relation to others. So now if I've seen God is love, he's made the way possible back for me from a place of darkness and death to life and light with him. Now I need to take that to others. Now I need to be the one who fulfills that purpose in this world and with others in every way I can. So that means that since God is diametrically opposed to every form of abuse that could ever happen, I as well, if I'm going to follow after Jesus, if I am going to be able to call myself a Christian, I will be diametrically, fundamentally opposed and resistant to every form of abuse. Hands down, full stop. We cannot make excuses. We have to be fully opposed and at the same time work to repair it, even if it's not my fault. And that's often where I think we get caught up, we get hitched up, and we're going to look at that in just a little bit. But just like God in Jesus took on the debt, the death, the judgment due all of humanity, not because he owed it, but because we did and couldn't pay it off. He paid for our mistakes, even though he didn't earn the judgment. We must then, as the Bible says, as God has loved us, so we must love others, then we need to love in like fashion. Which means we don't go, well, that wasn't my fault, I didn't do that. We go, what can I do to help make that right? Just like Jesus, okay? And what does that look like? Well, we're going to take a quick look at Galatians. These are some verses we looked at when we did a whole message on the fruit of the Spirit. Remember that? And remember we sang that goofy song? The fruit of the Spirit's not a coconut. No, we only got a couple. It's, where you do that in the coconut. Or banana. Remember, Juliana, you did banana for us. Can you do banana? There we go. She did a mini banana. It's a goofy song that we sang as kids, and we even sang it up here. But the idea was to help us remember that the fruit, meaning what is produced in anyone who is a follower of Jesus. That's what fruit is. If you're an orange tree, you produce what? Oranges. If you're an apple tree, you produce. If you're a pine tree, you produce. Someone said apples. Wow. Okay, I might have to go more back to the basics here. Point being, whatever tree you are, you produce like kind. You reproduce from what you are. So an apple tree will not produce oranges, nor will a pine tree produce apples. You can't. It can't happen. So if you are born of the Spirit, meaning if you are a follower of Jesus and you've received the washing, the regeneration of the Holy Spirit, which is offered to everyone who comes into faith with Jesus, that is yours, then what you produce will reflect. This is what that fruit is. Just like you could look at the apple and say, apple tree. When you look at these things, that means follower of Jesus. They have to be there. And if an apple tree never produced apples, what would you do with it? You cut it down, right? Now, it's not a one-to-one parallel when it comes to following Jesus, but the whole issue is if something is not producing what it should, that's not a no big deal. You go, something's wrong. What can we do to fix that? And that's what we need to be about. So Galatians, we'll start in verse 13 of chapter 5. And this is what Paul writes to these early Christian believers. He says, "For you were called to freedom, brothers, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh," meaning your own selfish desires, "but through love serve one another. Rather than thinking about yourself, love others in service." Not just in well wishes. He doesn't say just love one another, think fondly of them, but to serve them. And he caveats that, verse 14 gives the reason. "For the whole law is fulfilled, made right, total purpose achieved in one word or one thought. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And this is reflective directly of what Jesus said in Matthew 22. It's what we looked at last week in that message, if you want to go back and kind of dig into what that means, that we're made in the image of God. But all of what we have been commanded in all of Scripture comes back to two fundamental ideas. First and foremost is to love God with everything we've got. And the second, which is like it, meaning it is of similar merit, that it is the application of what the first looks like, is this. You know you're loving God when you love your neighbor as yourself. When you're willing to say, what I want, what I desire, what I need, all those things about me, they have value, but not supreme value over others. And in fact, that I will be part of a community that chooses to put others first. And as we do it, no one is left behind. Everyone has needs met. But we do it because we're outward focused, because it, at its absolute heart, reflects the love and the image of God. That is what we were called to do. And then verse 22, we skip down a few verses where he explains what that looks like and what this fruit of the Spirit is. And what is it? Well, it is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. I probably should have tested you all because we used that as a memory verse to see if you could all remember it, right? I'm sure you could have. Like right now, I could put Pat on the spot and she could do it. She's saying yes, I'm just going to believe her. Okay. Here's the thing. These are those characteristics. These are soul-level characteristics, but which must manifest exterior. You cannot be a patient person who has never demonstrated patience. You have to demonstrate it. You're not really a kind person if you've never been kind to someone. These are those things that you're not going to be perfect, but as the general and true trajectory of your life, someone will look at you and be able to go, oh yeah, he's kind. Oh yeah, she's patient. Oh yeah, he's got incredible self-control. Oh, her? Man, she's just good. And all of these things, if you would put them down, love, joy, peace, patience, the whole kit and caboodle, and say, which of these can exist in the presence of abuse taking place? Not a single one. You have to choose to walk away from the fruit of the Spirit if you are going to perpetuate or allow abuse to happen. They are mutually exclusive. If the fruit of the Spirit is light, then abuse is darkness. So if you're going to let abuse live, you're going to let it thrive and survive, you've got to shut off the light, you've got to shut off the fruit of the Spirit, the life of the Spirit in your heart. And I'll tell you, if you do that enough times, your heart towards the Lord grows cold. And as your heart towards the Lord grows cold, it ain't going to grow warm towards others. And as our hearts grow cold, as the fire and the flame of faith and goodness and love, as those things burn down to mere embers, mere coals, that which should warm this world and fuel this world leaves it in utter darkness. And we can't be a part of that. We can't make excuses. We have been given life and light and eternity. We've been told in John that we have been given life abundantly. Not just enough to get by, but more than we could ever imagine. So much so that out of abundance, we can share that love with others. We have to be about that. Now, before we talk about how we can do that, how we can step back, step away from abuse, I think we need to make an attempt to kind of define abuse biblically. And I found a resource. This is called the Biblical Counseling Coalition. It's a group that came together to try to say, hey, how do we approach the need for counseling and mental health issues, what we do about that from a biblical standpoint? How can we have the Bible inform what we do? And so they did a little bit of a study, and this is what they came up with. And I'll let you know, in their actual definition, they've got a whole bunch of verses attached. I can get those for you if you'd like. I looked through it, and it makes sense. I think this is a good attempt. It might not be perfect, it might not be exhaustive, but I think this will really help us get our minds focused. Here's what they say. Abuse entails physical violence, threats of physical violence, persecution, sexual mistreatment, and that one's a real broad one, reviling, speaking evil, or being under the misused power of another person or group of people. And as I was looking through their list and looking at their passages that they lined up with this to help flesh out this definition from what they were seeing in Scripture, I noticed a center. kind of what all of these revolve around. And I would say at the center is control and selfishness. So for whatever level of power I might have in any given situation, abuse happens when, out of selfishness, I use whatever power I have to get what I want at the expense of another. And so that might be a very small power differential, okay, where it's very, very similar, but I am going to use you. I will manipulate, control, force, whatever you want. That's the abuse to get my end. I will control it. And that's why I believe this can happen on one level in a unintentional way. I think there are instances where abuse is happening where someone's not going, I will abuse them today, I'll get them. But out of an unexamined heart that is bent on getting what you want, when pride is allowed to live and take root in our hearts, that we'll selfishly use whatever control we have over a situation, over others, to get what I want. It can happen unintentionally. Now, that doesn't excuse it, and that's why we have to examine ourselves to see if we're in that camp. But I think many times it happens very intentionally, where a calculation is made, where I look at it and say, what I want, because I want it, is of such value that your suffering is worth it, that your pain is worth it. I want what I want, I deserve what I want, and so I will make you pay for it, whether that's physically, emotionally, spiritually. And that's the thing. There are so many ways that abuse takes place. Oftentimes we think of it primarily abusive, where we see someone abusing someone else, that's physical injury being done. And that was even listed first on here. But in addition to all these, kind of the undercurrents, there's, yes, physical abuse, but there is emotional, intellectual, relational abuse. There is sexual abuse, which sexual abuse is not just, if I can, if I have to, trigger warning with this language, the idea of rape happening. That is absolutely abuse. But it's not that it has to get to the same level, such as penetrative rape. That's not, well, it's okay up till that. Any misuse, mistreatment of another sexually is abuse. And that was a hard one years ago for me to wrestle with, looking back to when I was a younger man before I came to faith in Christ, and what I took from women that wasn't mine to take, because I coerced them or manipulated them into things. That was a crushing realization that I was an abuser in this way. That crushes your soul a little bit. Now, the beautiful thing is that Christ's grace, his mercy, his forgiveness washes that clean. But I can't be so nonchalant and frivolous with that and say, I don't even have to think about it. No, I have to reconcile. I have to try to make things right. I have to set right those things which I have broken. And I think we all need to look at the fact that abuse can happen in so many different ways. There is abuse of power, which is one of the most prevalent. It's almost institutional in a way, where those in positions of authority can get what they want. In so many ways, I try so hard to limit myself as your pastor, that I have ways of keeping me accountable and transparent so that I can't abuse power. I try to be very careful in that way, because I do not want to muddy anyone's faith by misusing the power that is entrusted to me. We need to be very, very careful with these things, because it can damage in irrevocable ways. We've talked several times about the idea of deconstruction, right? You've heard us talk about that a number of times. And quite frankly, so often deconstruction, the idea of breaking apart, breaking down a faith that was kind of inherited, for instance, and just destroying it, taking it apart, before hopefully rebuilding up. But that process is so often initiated, or the impulse to enter into it comes from those who have been abused by those in authority within the church. Do you know how many times in a given year we get a news story pop through of a pastor or other church leader who has either manipulated congregants or a church out of monetary things, or has engaged in sexually inappropriate activity with someone in the church or even outside the church? I can't keep count of them anymore. I think 6 or 7 months ago, there was like 2 or 3 mega church pastors just in Texas, people who had hundreds of thousands of people that listened to them on a regular basis, that were caught up in sexual scandals. That not only is sexual abuse, that's abuse of power. And that can shipwreck, that's what this is the biblical language for it, that can shipwreck the faith of others. We have to be willing to look at it. We have to be willing to be transparent. And we have to do the work to make it right. So how can we remedy this? The fact of the matter is this is a huge topic, and I can't do it justice. Like I said, I am not one who has had to walk through the anywhere near the most severe forms of abuse. So if you are there, I want you to know that I am not trying to speak for you. I'm not trying to take your voice. I'm not trying to take any dignity away from you, trying to say that I understand what you went through. I can't fully. But I want to honor you and your story. I want to be an advocate for you, and I want us as a church family to be those who advocate, to be those who are for the abused, just like Jesus was. We have to reflect that from Jesus. But what are some of the things, knowing that it's real, knowing that it happens, knowing that, quite frankly, it's quite prevalent? What do we do about it? Well, I don't have a perfect playbook for us, but I have some ideas. After reading a whole bunch of resources, and I actually talked with a woman, a survivor from a religious cult this week. Her name is Martha. She took time out of her schedule to Zoom with me and talk to me about her experience where she went through some of the most hideous abuse of pretty much every form we've talked about at the hands of a religious organization. And yet she still works to bring the light and love of God into people's lives now. She's part of if you want to look it up, it's, I believe, cult-x.org on the internet. It's a place to try to create communities of healing and restoration and ways to walk out from these abuses within highly controlled organizations or religions. And she helped frame some of this out. I said, if you would be able to speak in front of our church on this topic, what would you want to be said? And she's helped guide and frame out some of these responses. Because here's the thing, I'm not perfect. I'm not going to perfectly communicate it, and I'm sure there's been times throughout my life, like I've said already, looking back earlier on, I was a perpetrator of abuse. So I share these things humbly, and I don't share them as a quick check-off list. Hey, if we do this, we're all good. But these are all things, these are all components that we need to think about. As best we're able, we need to both advocate for and take responsibility for a series of things. And it's kind of, in some ways, just an orientation of the heart. And I believe we need to start this way with believing these stories, believing the victims. Now, that doesn't mean unexaminedly. That doesn't mean if someone came up to you and said, oh yeah, Brad comes to my house every night at midnight and beats me with a lead pole, that you automatically call the police and say, yeah, you need to arrest Brad right now. In fact, please don't do that, okay? I'm asking you not to. That was just a wild example. But the idea is that if someone says a story, we don't go, I don't know about that, or I really know him, I'm not so sure that. We have to start with a place of, if someone is going to share this, I need to give them respect and dignity and the benefit of the doubt. I need to start there. Because quite frankly, if someone came to you and said, Pastor Brad is abusing me, I do not want you to dismiss that. Do you hear me? As your pastor, if anyone comes and says those words, do not dismiss them. Now, please investigate. Please search the truth out. Talk to the elders. Talk to others in positions of authority. Find ways of finding out what's really going on and coming resolution, because no one deserves abuse, whether it be by my hands or others, okay? And right now, I'm not worried about that because I'm working very hard not to be in any kind of an abusive position. But we have to be open to that. If someone brings that story, we don't start from a position of disbelief. We start from a heart orientation of giving the benefit of the doubt, because it can be terrifying to share stories of abuse. Because when abuse that has happened is shut down, if it's dismissed, if it's not taken seriously, or if the guilt is or the blame is put back on the abused, which has happened in multiple cases, not only is things not going to get better, you are actually perpetuating that abuse simply by dismissing it. So we have to come from a standpoint of providing the benefit of the doubt, both in our advocacy and in what we do to help correct. But we also need to provide support. We need to be supporting survivors in our relationships with them, but also access to resources. So I know even within our life group, we've had a number of situations where people have been in difficult spots, and when abuse has been taking place, and we've said, what can we do to help? Do you need a place to stay? Let me get you connected to this community resource. Can I drive you over to Good Samaritan, the women's shelter? All these things where we are not just saying, well, hey, good luck, I hope it gets better, but we need to be those where we can. We as a church will not solve this problem globally, but we can affect it. We can begin the process of change in our sphere, and the more and more we shine light into darkness, the room will get brighter and brighter, and we can do that in this supporting when it comes to relationship and resources. But we also need to support in the legal process. We need to create ways, and this can come down to how we vote and what we do with that. We'll talk more about that in our week on politics, so if you're waiting for that, that's coming in just a few weeks. But even when it comes to what we do, these things should primarily happen within our churches, within our community. That's how we were designed. But where it is not, and where we have opportunity to engage even the political process when it comes to shaping laws and access to legal supports, we need to do our part. And we need to take those things seriously. Because, like I said, abuse is rampant in our society. And in that, we need to advocate for change. We can't be okay with things staying the way they are. We can't be sleepy on this. Like, yeah, I know it's a big deal, but there's so many other things going on. The fact of the matter, people are literally being tortured in our modern world, and we can't be bothered to advocate. We can't be bothered to speak up about it. And again, I'm not talking about some big political thing. We'll deal with that a little bit when we talk about politics. What I'm talking about is in our circles. When we see things happening, when we see someone who is being controlled or manipulated by another, we need to advocate for that to change. We need to be willing to speak into that situation, even if, gasp, we're putting ourselves at risk. So if you're at work and you see someone who's suffering abuse, perhaps by a supervisor with the kind of comments they're making, whether they be sexual manner or another, maybe they are being discriminated against because of race, ethnicity, whatever it might be. When you see that happening, you have to be willing to advocate for the change. You have to speak up. You have to be an ally in that. When it comes to the idea of supporting through relationship, you be willing to stand up to the abuser. That's one of the hardest things. It's one of the crazy things about the justice of God we see in the Bible, where when someone is unjustly being treated, those who are not in the situation are called to step in front of the blows. Yes, you can get hurt. But until we all stand up, until we all are willing to stand up to those who will abuse power, and in doing so abuse us in all these other ways, those abusers are allowed to flourish. We need to stand up for those who can't because others are forcing them to kneel. We cannot just say, well, that's their problem. Nothing I can do. That is not a godlike reaction. And lastly, this is more of kind of a general one for us, we need to foster a culture of safety and respect. Here must be, when we gather Grace Church, it's got to be safe. If we see abuse happening in any way, we do not let it stand. That we speak up. That we say, we're going to do it the Jesus way or not at all. And the not at all isn't an option. So we have to do that for where we can within our walls as a church family, but also within our families, within our neighborhoods. You know, we should all be known in our respective neighborhoods as that's the safe place. If you're hurting, if you're in trouble, you can go to Martin and Michelle's. You can go to Glenn or Janice. You can go to Rob. You can go to Lori. These are the people you can go to because it's safe. That's who we have to be, church. Hands down. But it moves into not just focusing on those who are abused, but also kind of the other side. And that's the idea of we need to educate ourselves and others. We need to be aware of the problem, aware of how it's happening, and in so doing, be able to effect appropriate change. We have to look at the problem for what it actually is. When we hear of someone abusing someone else, not just be like, oh, that stinks. Actually look into it. Be willing to look into the darkness so that we're better able to shine light onto it. We need to challenge within ourselves and others harmful beliefs. If something we're believing is leading us to manipulate or control others individually or as a church family, as a community, whatever it is, we have to challenge it. We have to speak up. And in that, there is just that speaking out. Too often, it's so uncomfortable of a topic to talk about that we just don't talk about that. Hence why we're talking about it now. We have to put words to this. And often, we have to put words to it because those who are being abused aren't able. They're being controlled. They're being manipulated. They don't know how to speak the truth that needs to be spoken. So as we're educated, as we've challenged our own harmful beliefs and the beliefs of others, we need to be that voice for the voiceless, and we need to 100% hold abusers accountable. One of the things that has happened over the last number of years is there was a lot of evidence of sexual abuse taking place within the Southern Baptist Convention, if you're familiar with that. It was kind of a pretty big news story for a number of years now, where pastors who were found guilty of particularly sexual abuse were not appropriately held to account, and they were just kind of shifted from one church to another. And it's not like, well, they messed up once and it stayed there. It followed them wherever they went. And so that this huge organization, this huge Protestant denomination, man, they were participants in abuse perpetuating. They kept it going because people were not held to account. And even after they recognized what happened and they said, oh, hey, we're going to put a commission on this, we're going to work on it, it has been years and it still hasn't been resolved. And I understand they're a way bigger organization than us. We can change things within ourselves way quicker than a group that has like millions and millions of people that are part of it. Okay? But even so, we have to be willing to hold to account. We have to be willing to make those changes. If something happens, we cannot just dismiss it. And people will say things like, well, yes, that church leader, that church person, yeah, they did do something sexually inappropriate, or they did abuse their position in this way or that. But we really have to keep quiet about it because we don't want to hurt the testimony of the church. Have you guys ever heard that before? I've heard it all over the place. I've heard it from people that I respect within churches that are dealing with stuff. I was part of a church where I did a kind of a missions trip for 2 months, and when I came back, the associate pastor was gone. And I asked where he was, and I was told by the lead, he's gone. I said, yes, I figured that out. What happened? Your leaders dealt with it. That sounds a little sketchy. I love you and trust you, but that sounds very suspicious. You just need to trust your leaders. And even though I was literally on staff at that church in a leadership position, the lead pastors and the elders would not speak. No one in the church knew. He was just, this other staff member was just gone. I later found out through other means what it was. I didn't do an in-depth searching out, but by relationships, I figured out. He and I had maintained contact after that. And I figured out what it was. And quite frankly, it wasn't that bad. It was just lack of responsibility on something. But because this leadership was so concerned about saving the image of the church, everybody thought this guy had been doing something terrible, like rape or some other form of sexual misconduct. We cannot do that. We cannot be hush-hush because we don't want to hurt the testimony of the church. When we stay silent in the face of abuse, we do something way worse than hurt the reputation of our church. Do you know what we do? We hurt the soul of our church. And in so doing, it ruins our testimony as well. We must hold accountable those who need to be held to account. And at the same time, we have to do this, and that is offer compassionate discipleship to perpetrators. That does not mean, say, oh, now, that was a little naughty, don't do it again. That we are holding to account those who need to be held to account. We have to understand that Jesus, his blood, his sacrifice covers all sins. His sacrifice is enough that it can cover even the worst of the worst. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't boundaries. That doesn't mean that there aren't repercussions. But it means that grace and mercy and compassion can be extended even to the worst of the worst. And we do that even while holding to account. So we're wrapping this up. Those are all ideas of kind of how this starts. This is the beginning of what it means to be those who deal with abuse. I know there's a lot of words up there. If at any time you guys want the stuff that's on the screen, I can get that to you later. You can check with your life group leaders because I can put that out for all of them every week. But here's how we need to kind of wrap it up. It's very similar to last week. The intersection of faith and abuse meets at love for others. That's where it meets. We're going to wrap up now with one final song. We're going to be singing the words, you are my all in all, where we look to God and say, you are my everything. But the only way that can be true is if I am actively loving others, if I am loving my neighbor like myself, if I'm willing to consider the needs of others before my own. If I want to honestly cry out, hands held high in worship, Lord, you are my all in all. That cannot be done divorced from the fact that when those who are abused are within our sphere of influence, we can't choose to do nothing and say, oh yeah, but I worship God. I can't be bothered with them. Remember, I didn't do it. It's not my fault, I'm just here to love Jesus. They need to be responsible for themselves. They just need to, we all go through hard stuff. They need to stop making such a big deal about it. These are things I've heard. I've heard of people who have been through horrible abuse, and the advice they got from people in the church has been, you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That is evil. It's not intended. I don't believe intended evil, but that is evil. We have to be those who, if we're going to love God, if we're going to say that's the core of who we are, we do everything within our sphere to love others. We're not going to be perfect, but we can do our best at any given moment to love like Jesus. That's what we're called to.